Go back to the 28th president, had to be the most racist president we've ever elected in the history of this country. Also a big believer in eugenics. Just a horrible, horrible human being by the name of Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson was looking at Germany, and he's like, I like the way they're doing stuff over there. Here's what I think we should do. First of all, we need to have this thing called the new freedoms. We want to get rid of the old freedoms. He saw the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Well, that's just silly. That's antiquated, and most of that stuff is just bunk. And the American people are just they're not sophisticated enough to really understand how to run government. One time he uses an analogy that if you had a cook in your house and they were making dinner, you would never stand over the shoulder of the cook and tell the cook what to put in the meal and making soup or whatever. You would sit down and wait, and then the cook would prepare the meal perfectly and then serve it to you. And that's kind of the way he saw government. We don't need you guys, the people, telling us what to do because we're much smarter than everybody else because we're going to have a bunch of experts, and the experts are going to run everything. So he's going to get rid of the old freedoms. The old freedoms like limited government, balanced fairness. These were some of the old ideas. He didn't like individual rights and liberty. He was like, pshaw to that. I want you to envision society as a beehive, and the center of the beehive would be the experts, and the rest of you would all be kind of working around the edges, like in a beehive, helping to support the experts, the bureaucracy that's going to be really running everything, because they know better than you do. He really had great disdain for the average American, saw most of us as a bunch of bumpkins, and he loved the idea, we'll just centralize control. More power given to just to the bureaucracy, to the executive branch, and he really had a problem with the U.S. Constitution. He just didn't like the separation of powers. So it was our beloved, horrible racist president, Woodrow Wilson, by the way, from Princeton, who said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to set up separate agencies. So he set up, let's see, he had the federal banks in there. He was also involved in the FCC. He liked the independent agencies because he said, well, these guys can operate outside the bounds of the Constitution, and they can have their own money, and they can do far more work because these independent, quote-unquote, independent agencies would allow us to be able to, sort of circumvent this awful, checks and balances that those numbskull, never called those going to be numbskulls, the founding fathers, we need to break away from that and have a different type of government. So it was Woodrow Wilson that established them, and it was Ronald Reagan that passed a law that said they needed to be accountable. That was often overlooked, and bigger bureaucracies grew, all of these people unelected, determining where the money was going. So now you have Trump coming in there, and the judge just said the other day, yeah, you can bring them in. He's trying to put them in different departments under the Commerce Treasury, and under Commerce, under Treasury, under Labor, move them away from being independent, make them accountable to somebody. So that's generally the idea. More and more I read about Woodrow Wilson, the more I hated that guy. I mean, I always disliked him, because I knew what a horrible racist human being he was. Right. But I had no idea that he thought so little of us.
By the way,
the Constitution was outdated, he said, and needed an army of bureaucrats that would circumvent the voters. That was a quote.
Yeah. He created the Federal Reserve, the Federal Trade Commission, and the IRS.
Yeah, he did.
And you gave your eyebrow twitched a little bit when you said Princeton.
Yes, it did. Because the only reason he got elected is because the Republicans couldn't get their act in shape. They couldn't figure out how to run against. So he slips in there and wins the thing. Only Princeton, I think Princeton took away his name off of some of the buildings and stuff like that. But that's the worst thing that Princeton has ever given us.